Hello, and welcome to another video. I am doing from, once again, Julia Aristides' Beginning Drawing Atelier and Instructional Sketchbook. I am in the final chapter, which is all about drawing a portrait. And basically the final chapter, drawing a portrait, is the culmination of all the lessons learned before: tone, value, form, measuring, proportion, all the basics, starting from simple shapes to combining those into something complex and shading them into what is essentially an extremely complex endeavor, which is drawing a portrait. As you can see, the techniques and the process does not change in the least bit. You start out with measuring in proportion, and you saw that I was actually measuring because when I have the subject in front of me, like a photo, and I don't need to blow it up, although you could use math to make it bigger, I can actually just measure it and try to get it as close to the original as possible. Or you could use comparative measurement, which is like holding your pencil out in front of you and your thumb as the basically marker on the pencil for where something begins and ends, and then transfer that to your paper. But used a ruler here and also used my eye. I don't know if you could tell since I sped it up so much, but I literally redrew and erased my lines that I measured, even though you would think that if you measured them they'd be correct, like 3 different times. So still more important to use your eyes than anything else. And then from there, you can see that I have my outline of the head all done like I did in previous videos. It's just kind of a basic drawing thing, and I used really straight, simple lines. I didn't even put curves in at that point, basically kind of mimicking the drawing on the left, and also using those straight, simple lines for sketching in where my shadows will be further on. Not all of my shadows though, just kind of the really big main ideas. And then from there I can start doing a mid-tone on my biggest shadows. It's not going to be the final shading or tone of my shadow. I just do one wash of shadow so that I'm not thinking ahead of myself. I'm not getting ahead of my thoughts actually. And I'm just kind of putting down the basic ideas first. So the process doesn't change, even though a portrait is infinitely more complex than drawing a simple shape like a teapot, or a sphere, or combining a sphere into a teapot even, or even a leaf. Portraits are just so much more difficult because any teeny tiny minor change will be extremely noticeable, and it will no longer look like the person you're drawing the portrait of. Even this portrait here that I did, even though I measured everything, I did everything almost as exactly as I possibly could, she looks more Europeanized and older than the final portrait, partly because I made her nasolabial crease a little more defined, and also partly because I moved her cheekbone a little bit. I think her cheekbone was higher in the original than what I have drawn here, and so she looks a little heftier and a little more European and a little older than the final. But actually turned out pretty good still, once again, not deviating too much from the original, which you can kind of see. I pull up on my phone a couple of times, and you could also see in the beginning of this video when I flipped the page over in order to take a picture as my reference. And here I'm just refining my shadows on the face and on the hair. The end result, it wasn't like a completely finished portrait, like her clothes weren't finished. I'm putting in some of my darkest darks just as my references, although they almost never end up being the darkest. You always have to go over them once you've put in all your shadows, so don't get overzealous with your darkest darks right from the very beginning or even at this point. Always remember that they're going to get darker and darker as you put in the rest of your shadows. So really just work on your midtones first and keep going. Your highlights also, leave them empty, because erasing and pencil is almost never enough to get those bright enough.